Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behavior nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behavior geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behavior nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Well, we'll start today's episode where we are very excited to welcome back to the show Amy Schliz. Amy says when standing in front of a giraffe training partner, she is acutely aware of how lucky she is to have been surrounded by such amazing people and animals throughout her entire life. All of those people have led to her current role, which is the Senior Animal Behaviorist for the International Centre for the Care and Conservation of Giraffes. The organisation is run by the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo and partners with Dr. Susan Friedman and the Behaviour Works team. Amy's dabbled in field research, veterinary nursing and zookeeping. While exploring all of the options of where she could best focus her time and energy to make a difference, she discovered the science of behaviour change. ABA, Applied Behaviour Analysis, has changed how she works with both animals and people throughout the years. She enjoys coaching training sessions, running giraffe workshops, and continuing to learn from others. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Amy back to the show today. Amy, thanks so much for taking even more time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy.
Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it.
I was liking when I was reading in your bio there, where is it? ABA's changed how you work. And literally just before we jumped on here, you were showing me a video of 10 years ago.
Yeah.
How you trained the behavior. And do you want to walk us through that? Because that was awesome. And I thought we should share that.
Yeah.
We should share that.
I can nerd out over behavior all day long. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. I think, we were talking a little bit about what does it look like to help coach or have new people come in to the field and where do we start with them? I think that we were all taught through trial and error, and it takes a pretty resilient person to be able to learn in that manner. And same for the animals on the other side of that. So if we can help set people up to be more successful when they're first starting out in training, you guys don't need to learn through the same mistakes that we've already made. After you've been in the field for 20 years, you figure out things that work for you and things that improve. And I just, it's our goal to take those 20 years away and put them into a package that you guys can start with, start the ground running with the more advanced kind of stuff. And I love that Ryan asked me, could you imagine what it would look like in 10 years to watch the videos of right now, how we're training right now. And that will hopefully even be 10 more years ahead and way more skill sets ahead of where we are today. One of the videos was just me trying to get a giraffe to put its foot on the block. The block was in the middle of the stall, and I was just taking any approximation that was closer to that giraffe putting its foot on the block. So it started with a step over the block. It started with, and then a step towards the block. Then the other foot touched the block. So it was just getting the giraffe engaged in, it's about the block. It's something about the block. But there were 3 or 4 approximations in there where I withheld reinforcers because the behavior that I was looking for was headed in a direction that the animal was offering me something else. So I just withheld that as a way to communicate, no, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm going to withhold your reinforcers until you give me something that's closer to the criteria that I am looking for. And, like nowadays we're trying to shape so that every single approximation is reinforceable. And how we do that is by looking at their foundation behaviors of what do they need to know in order to know something else. Like now I have the target behavior trained with duration, and I use that behavior to help teach backup. And then I use the backup and the target to help teach line up with me. And that's when we put the block in, because I can cue them where to put their feet so that the very first time they put their foot directly on the block in the position that we want, because we've built that. There is no let's try and see what happens and maybe he'll get it right. Like we're guiding them towards the right behavior all of the time. And we see less fallout when we train like that. I have a lot of examples from 10 years ago where I was using the withhold reinforcers strategy, and Mashama, the giraffe that I was teaching, was backing up when I withheld reinforcers after 2 approximations. He would back up and head swing. Like those to me would be, I put in the label of frustration. So we can operationalize frustration by backing up and head rolling with Mashama. I would see that if I was withholding reinforcers. He didn't know what I wanted. That's on me. That's my shaping program that I need to take responsibility for when I see those behaviors that would indicate frustration. Like I should be taking that in as data. I have that written down as one of my, key things that if I could get on a stage and say to 5,000 people is that, I think 20 years ago, we were told to train in a way where you reinforce the behaviors that you do want to see and ignore all of the behaviors you don't want to see. But all of the behaviors on the planet have a function. So if we're ignoring behaviors that have a function, we're missing out on information. So what is the function of those behaviors? Like for Mashama to back up and head roll, to me, the function of that was for me to change my shaping plan, change my program. Like I should be doing something different. And I think that we got so used to ignoring the no's or the I don't want to do that from the animals. And we were just saying, do this or else. So I've changed a lot. And it was based off of punishment for me in my training. Like I wasn't getting to where I wanted to be, and I would stop doing the things that would cause aggression. Right. So yeah, it was interesting. Good journey.
I don't know if we can share any of those videos in the podcast write-up. I think it's the best example I've seen in regards to errorless learning and what that looks like. So the first video that Amy was talking about was from 10 years ago, where you're free shaping. I would call it free shaping. You were just standing there with your food, your reinforcers, and you're waiting for the giraffe to offer an approximation towards the behavior you want. And you got there, and it was cool to see you free shaping. But as you said, there was some frustration, or actually you didn't say that. As you said, there were a couple of repetitions that didn't get reinforced, where we could imagine the possibility for frustration or confusion to occur. And the second, if I hadn't seen the second video that you showed me, that the giraffe just put its foot in the exact position you wanted it, I would have been like, well, that's a behavior that you guys have been doing for years.
Yep.
Like it was that smooth, and that was the first time that you got it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So now we're looking at things like, how do we get it right on the very first try? Like we spend a lot of time thinking about our antecedents. We spend a lot of time thinking about our foundation behaviors, so that when we're going for this target end goal, every single approximation or response towards that end goal is something that we can reinforce and the animal doesn't fail. Failure is on us. Like our program's not right. So yeah, we're looking at that a lot more now. And I have some really cool videos of like a backup, like behavior with a back foot on the block where they're lined up separately. So the keeper taught the giraffe to come forward, to move in. So line up its hip to the mesh and then back up, and it backed up until it put its foot on the block, and it already had a history of front foot on the block. So the very first time that she was teaching back foot on the block, we were able to knife it out. It was just crazy. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's an impressive skill to be able to unpack their vision of a final behavior, or knowing what that looks like from having worked with it with other individuals of the same species doing the same behavior, but to unpack all of the individual parts of that and teach those foundational behaviors. I'm sure that's just that's so useful for any behavior of any species that you work with, to kind of be up. And it's a skill that I feel like I'm developing to tease, and Mary Hunter's teaching me to tease out all of those individual pieces.
Yeah, it's so funny because when you look back at Skinner and what Skinner talked about, it's in all of his paperwork, right? But it's just starting to be applied to the animal world and the animal community. Yeah, prerequisite skills or foundational behaviors. Like it's really cool to see it grow, and it's cool to see that there's language that has already been there that we just haven't unearthed, that we can put towards these things that keepers, through trial and error, we're finding that we're working. But like, had we opened a textbook of Skinner's, I had never put that together. So it's really cool to work with people like Dr. Friedman, who has that history and can say, oh, that's what you're doing. That's, she'll go through with me and look at everything on slow motion or freeze frame and ask, why did you do that? Why did you make that decision? What's that there? And she has the language to go with the explanations that I'm seeing, because a lot of it for me is just data from the animal. I don't always know the history or the language that goes with it. I just know whether it's working or not working. So it's fun to dissect all that kind of stuff. And then, once we're like, oh, this is what that is, it's been explained here, how can we apply it the best that we can apply it? We'll go and try it in a little bit of a different way with some more information.
I'm conscious that in part one I didn't even ask you a question. The first question I wanted to ask you, and my brain is firing, the neurons in my brain are firing, generating so many different paths we could go down in conversation right now. But I'm going to stick to topic because I'm really excited to talk about the thing we're going to talk about today. But I want to say to you listening as well, if you haven't listened to part one of this episode, you can find it in whatever app you're listening to this on. There's the previous one to this one. Encourage you to go listen to it. Amy shared about the Giraffe Center and all the amazing work that she's doing and her team's doing and is happening with giraffe and training at the moment. You are, of course, welcome to listen to that after. Stay tuned to this episode. It's going to be equally fantastic. I'm excited to talk about something that is such a crucial skill, like the one we've just talked about. It's such a crucial skill to build as trainers, especially for trainers who are guided by the most positive, least intrusive philosophy, which ideally everyone is. However, I can only speak for Animal Training Academy. We lean on it heavily here. Amy, I'm excited because you're a consultant for Behavior Works, and I feel about this concept of dialogue, which we're going to talk about today, is one that's so important to Susan. And I'm sure when I retook LLA this year, Susan Friedman's Living and Learning with Animals online course, she was quoting you so often concerning this topic about dialogue. So I'm excited to go to the source today and have this conversation. But you've kindly come up with 5 things trainers can do to improve their dialogue with their non-human learners, with their learners. 5 things trainers can do, 5 things you, the listener, can do to improve your dialogue with your non-human learners. Before we start with numbers though, Amy, could you please, in your own words, define what dialogue means for you?
Yeah. So I had to think about it for a minute, and if it's okay, I'll tell a story of how we got here. But I, within the first year of being at Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, we were able to teach all of our giraffes to participate in voluntary hoof care. So I got called into our CEO's office, and he was asking me what we thought were the bright spots. Why did it work? And how can we replicate this throughout the rest of the zoo? And I didn't know how to answer him because I was scared to say what was in my brain. And what was in my brain, which I did end up saying, I was like, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't want to get fired. And he was like, no, just tell me what it is. And I was like, I can talk to them. They're talking the whole entire time that we're working with them. They are talking. And he was like, I can believe what you're saying. I don't think they're actually using words. And I was like, no, but in my mind, they are. They're saying, I don't want to do that. That looks great. Hey, thanks for the reinforcer. I can picture all of that. happening during our training sessions. And I hadn't met Susan Friedman yet, so I didn't have the science to back it up. In the first 10 years of my teaching or learning about behavior, it was all that it was an art and it was this gift that people were bestowed upon. So like you're either a Picasso or you drew figure sticks. It wasn't something that you could learn or that there were skills in. And so, like it felt, this is just like, it's going to sound crazy, but it felt like it was like an art that you, or a talent that you just possessed, right? And I didn't know how to teach that to other people. So when we were teaching our newer keepers that were in the area, I was saying things like, it feels like the right thing to do, or trust your gut here. But like, we don't have the same feelings, we don't have the same gut, and we don't have the same instincts. So being able to teach it was hard for me. So enter Susan Friedman, who the Sue had worked with for many years and I never had. We started, like, I was listening to her and watching her when she was coming to the zoo, and she started coming to the giraffe barn to watch some of the training that we were doing. And she was able to give me language that went with this. And it was cool to recognize that is a skill set and everybody is capable of building it. It's not something that is just a gift and then you'll either have it or you don't have it. If we can teach it in a way, in a science-based way, other people can replicate it. And that's what we need to be doing so that giraffes are really good care. But there is a conversation happening. The giraffes are using their body language to talk to you. And we just need to listen to it. And so she taught me how to operationalize it and how to put functional assessments in. Like when they're saying yes, we're probably using positive reinforcement. When they're saying no, we use escape avoidance behaviors. And we can give them a voice through our behavior, how we interact with them. If they're, twitching their skin and we take our hands off, they have more control over the session. So yeah, that's where it started. But this whole dialogue thing for me started with her giving me language to what was working for us. And what was working was just watching behavior increase where we wanted it to increase and decrease where we wanted it to decrease. But those are all science-based, things that we can pull upon to get a little bit better.
In that dialogue part, and Susan helping guide your thoughts in terms of if we're getting a yes, we're likely using positive reinforcement. If we're getting escape avoidance, we're likely using different contingencies. And it makes me think about a common term in the industry that gets used, start buttons, and how that's evolved over time. And Ava and Emily and creators of Start Buttons, Peggy Hogan, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but that's evolved to Start Button contingencies because it was appreciated that it was not just the behavior of the animal that was important there, it was the whole dialogue.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny to see that, it's popped up in different species, right? Like we were using it, I don't know, a while ago without knowing that the dog community was using it as well. So once, it's cool to see that, Susan's a bridge to get those communities talking together because we have been using it for a long time. And people who didn't know what that was had no idea what we were doing. I had no idea what we were doing. I just knew that it worked. So Susan would ask, like, why are you having them do this? And I was like, because I can tell then that they're engaged in the session. When their head was up, we ended up putting ourselves potentially in compromised safety positions. So if you can picture a giraffe standing in front of you and you're asking it to do a behavior, you ask it to put its foot on the block. And then you want to do some things to the feet that are potentially uncomfortable for the animal, like knifing out the foot or using a rasp. Sometimes we use, loud equipment like a Dremel or a drill bit that has like a brush on it, a wire brush on it to their feet, that could potentially be something that the giraffe doesn't want to have happen. And if the giraffe, who's got a 7-foot long neck, has his head up and is looking, off to the side, watching its counterparts, and we go in to rasp its foot, it wasn't working. By that, I mean, it would take its foot off the block. So I started to see patterns of, okay, when the giraffe's head is down and it's looking at me, it's more successful we're more successful in having them stay still while we apply something to their foot. And if their head is up off to the side, they take their foot back. So we just watched for what works. And what was working was they were looking at us and their head was on the target stick. That was a very clear way for me to know that they were paying attention to me. And I could offer a cue. If their head is up and they're looking off to the left, we don't know what they're looking at. And as me as an individual, I would like to be asked permission for someone to touch me before they touch me. I don't want someone just to walk up and like put their hand on my shoulder, especially if it's someone I don't know very well. I'm like, what the heck is that? And you like whip around and turn. I want the giraffes to be willing participants in their healthcare. I don't want them to be surprised. I want them to know what's going to happen. And I want them to say yes. And one of the ways that we were able to get that was with I think in the dog community, they call it the start button. We've been saying the I'm ready signal. So look at me. When you look at me, the contingencies will start to go into play. Like a cue will happen. If you participate, you'll get food on the other side of that. So yeah, it was a safety thing for us too, because if we were standing at their feet and trying to do things to their feet and we touched them when they weren't engaged in the session, and they pulled their foot back off really quick or put it down to the side really quick, that could put us in danger. So we got really good at looking at those signs of when they were willing to do things and work with us and when they were paying attention to something else.
So it's not just us cueing the animals, it's the animals cueing us, cueing us to go, all right, give me their food now. Do the behavior of giving me the food, or do the behavior of removing their thing.
So we have a no signals as well. So we had one giraffe, Mashana, who was taking her foot back off the block pretty quickly a lot of the time. And it was a little bit intimidating for us, the people who are by her feet, like we don't want to get kicked. We don't want to get to the place where they get kicked. And I just remember thinking like, I want you to be able to say no to me, but I don't want it to be a kick. Like, how do you say no without kicking me? Like, so we started to look at and pay attention to any of the precursors that would lead up to that kick. They're essentially behavior chains. So what we saw by watching the videos, because we always take videos of when we're training, was, we look for each individual's predictor of the foot coming off the block. They all have different ones. They're all individuals. Some of them flare a nostril, and then some of them twitch their skin. Some of them swish their tail, but there's typically a really small behavior in there that we could catch and provide the same function of hands coming off of them as the kick does. They can either learn, if I kick my foot out, they'll take their hands off, or they can learn if I flare my nostril, they'll take their hands off. I prefer the flare nostril. So we start looking at those behaviors and providing functions to them. And the function that they're wanting when they take their foot back, we can guess is that they want whatever aversive that we have on their feet off. So we want to give them control over their session. We know that control is a primary reinforcer, right? It's just as important as food. So if they learn that they can control our behavior, that's one more reinforcer that we have in our back pocket while we're training. So if we've got the giraffe who's got his head down and they say, I'm ready, I'm willing to participate with you, please give me a cue. We cue rasp. We rasp their foot and they skin twitch, the rasp comes right off because they have control over whether or not that aversive is touching them. And then we figure out, okay, you said no. How do we get the yes? So then we start strategizing on like, do we need less pressure? Do we need to go to a different spot in the foot? Do we need shorter duration? What can I change to get the yes so that I can get you back? One of the strategies that has been really helpful is to do what we call discrete ABC training. So if they have their nose on the target stick, we cue rasp, we swipe the foot with one rasp swipe, bridge, and then reinforce. That would be a discrete ABC run. You could see that pretty clearly. In that consequence, the hands and the rasp come off and they get a food reinforcer. So they get two reinforcers in that ABC run. That one of them is control and then one of them is food. So we can outcompete the saying no by providing the same consequence, and upping the ante with some positive reinforcement on the behavior that we do want to see, which is staying nice and still. So that's one of the ways that we're able to build it up. And then we build up the pressure, we build up the duration, we build up the criteria, right? And if they say no at any point, we go back. We don't have to keep pushing forward. They're allowed to say no, and then we adjust our program.
Your discrete ABC trial, to call it a trial, had me curious about what the opposite of that is. I know that I'm very reinforced by teaching people in a slideshow classroom format, like this in the ABC format, like unless you're writing the ABCs out. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. And like if the animal does something else, then this happens. So knowing what those two options are or three options. And that's, I feel like, a very systematic way of thinking about this, which I feel relates to your discrete ABCs.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is there a less systematic way? Is there a more like, what is the opposite of discrete ABCs? How does that look?
What Susan was looking at when she was looking at our videos too, and just asking like, what are you doing? Like, I don't see the contingencies in play. So a lot of the times with our giraffes, we build our hoof care program with those discrete ABC trials. And when we can get a giraffe to stay still for a long period of time, it's helpful for us as the people working on the feet if we don't have to stop every time there's a bridge, right? So what we end up doing is going more into, it's so crazy because it's all new, and I'm hoping that I'm going to get the terminology right. We're going to have to double check with Susan, but these different reinforcements schedules. So in the way I understand it is in the lab, they're taught with discrete ABC trials, right? So the rat presses the lever, food appears. But when we're starting to work with giraffes in these changing conditions, they're not in a box. They're not in a lab. We've got farriers at the feet. We've got different knives. We've got different people using different pressure. It's the real world. It's not these discrete ABC trials. So what we ended up doing with our giraffes is once they're trained and they know the contingencies, they know when I cue rasp that the rasp is going to touch their foot, and they'll know what that sensation is. We pause for a second between the cue and the rasp touching their foot. And if they know the communication system, we've built that ahead of time, they can skin twitch or tail swish before it touches their foot. So they'll say, no, I don't want that before it even touches them. And we know we have to adjust our program there, but we give them a choice. If they say yes, then we feed them while we rasp. So we build those discrete ABC runs first. But if they're comfortable and they know all of those contingencies and they get the chance to say yes or no, they can still say no while the rasp is touching their foot. But we don't stop. So we can have like 5-minute long sessions or 10-minute long sessions instead of having to rasp, bridge, pay. Rasp to rasp, voice, bridge, pay. We can just continually rasp and continually feed. So we've kind of come up with a term for that. Susan watched all the videos with me, and we figured, that we were doing something that was working. So how can we put language to it so that we can teach it to other people? And none of this, like, it's the right thing to do. I can feel it in my gut. Like, what are we doing? What can we call it? And how can we teach it? So we came up with the dynamic reinforcement system. This is where we change our rate of reinforcement based off of how hard whatever is happening on their foot is, or, like if it's a blood draw or something else, we can change our rate of reinforcement, but we're not doing those discrete ABC runs. And you'll see this, like I see keepers use this all of the time, but there was never language put to it before because it wasn't invented in the lab. It's something that happens in the real world. So if I ask the giraffe to put its nose on, or like hold up the target, the giraffe cues me to cue rasp, I cue rasp, and we start rasping, I'll feed at a rate of like 1 every 3 seconds. If we go to nippering, and historically I've learned that the giraffe will pull the nipper off or pull their foot off the block when we nipper, I will increase my rate. So 1 every 1 second for that. And we move through this whole training session, and we adjust our rate based off of what the giraffe had historically told us is hard for them on their foot. If we're in a bruise, we know that we feed super high rate of reinforcement, high magnitude, high value. If we're at their toes where it's less painful, typically we'll do 7 knife swipes per 1 cracker. So we just adjust it based off of what they have told us for each individual is hard for them in the past. And then we can get ahead of them saying, no, like, I'm going to make this worth it for you. I promise. I know that RASP is hard for you. Hang in there with me. I'm going to increase my rate for you here. Okay, we're out. Let's go back to the toes. We're going to take it a little slower. Here's your rate's going to drop to, 1 every 7 knife swipes instead of 1 every 1 knife swipe. So yeah, it's been a cool strategy. And I think it's something that we use, like the vet shows up, right? And you've trained your animal for an injection that could last up to 3 seconds. And you've trained it so that they line up, they hold still, you inject them, and then food comes. But on the day the vet is there, you're like, just stay with me, and you're feeding them the whole time while they get the injection. Like, we can recognize when it's harder and try to provide consequences that are more worth it than just the regular day training stuff.
Whilst simultaneously looking
for the nose.
Towels for the nose.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times if we see the no or we see the tell, that signals to me that I have to go back and retrain something. So we'll pull out the RASP behavior and we'll work on that with our discrete ABC trials until we can get back to the place where we're using the dynamic reinforcement system. We'll go back and do 1 knife swipe bridge pay, 2 knife swipes bridge pay, until we can get up to the place where they're not saying no.
And the reason it might digress is because maybe a no was missed.
That, or, their feet change, and I could show you the bottom of what a foot looks like. You might see a rock in there. You might see a bruise where they stepped on something hard. You might see a bacteria tract. Those are all things we want to get out, and we can recognize that they're painful and that we have to make it way more worth it than just a regular hoof trim session. So the person at the foot who's doing all that work is feeding the information to the person at the head so that they can adjust their rate while they're going for it. So like while I'm at the head, the person at the foot might be saying, Amy, I see a rock. I'm going to go for it. Okay, great. 4 crackers. Okay, we're back in the toes. I don't see anything. Okay, great. Here's a rate of 1 cracker for every 7 knife swipes. But we're looking at their foot. That tells us what we think is going to be painful. Sometimes we have to teach them what the RASP sensation is and that it's worth it to stay still. That one's a little bit harder for some of our animals than for others. So yeah, it's all like watching them. And I'm literally just watching and seeing, is your foot staying on? Is your foot coming off? And if it's coming off, what predicted that? And how can I fix it for the future?
It's a well-oiled machine to have all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's been really funny because our team did change over, and there was so much communication built into this team that we had that was together for 8 years that we didn't realize that we were cueing each other. So the new people we were training in at the feet, I would be staring at them, waiting for information, which we didn't realize was nonverbal communication from the person at the foot. So Rachel would show me a brush and I would cue brush to the giraffe verbally, but I was looking at the person and they were waiting for me to say what tool they needed to use. But I look at them for that information because they're the one who can see the foot. So when we were teaching it new people and we just it was silent and we were just looking at each other like, what is happening here? We had no idea that we had these cues built into our training program. So then we're like, oh my gosh, Rachel, what do you do that tells me what I should do? And then she would say, oh, I think I do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. So we had to go back and look at our cues for each other because we didn't realize that we had this nonverbal system built in. So we had to teach that to the newer people too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, for the listeners of the show who are hearing for the first time dynamic reinforcement systems and thinking about their husbandry behaviors with their learners, whatever species they may be, part of everything you've talked about thus far is dialogue. And so you talked about standing on the stage in front of 5,000 people before. For the listeners of this show, a question I ask all guests before they come on is, our podcast audience is about 5,000 people, what they would like to say to 5,000 people. And I asked this to Amy, and she said the word dialogue. And as mentioned at the start of this episode, you've come up with 5 things trainers can do to improve their skills here, to improve their dialogue with their non-human learners. Can we work through this list now, starting with number 1?
We talked about it a little bit, so I'm just going to change the order just so that it's fresh on everybody's mind. But I think the first thing that I think people could get used to, it's a newer thought process, right, is the idea of the I'm ready signals, or the what they call in the dog community, the start buttons. Just the thought process of how much it has changed over the last 20 years is pretty incredible to me, that we are at a place now, like you said, where the animal cues you to cue a behavior when they're ready. Just giving those animals a little bit of power back over the session. It's no longer a keeper or a trainer standing up there giving a command and expecting a response, and if they don't do it, withholding food. I think those are places where we can just get a little bit better. I know that for me, if I have to cue more than one time, there's something wrong with the program. Either we're in an environment where the animal isn't comfortable, we haven't generalized that behavior, the animal isn't paying attention to what we're asking for, and then we as trainers get louder or make our cues bigger. It goes from sit to sit to sit, right? And then your cue becomes this yelling word, sit. So if you're finding yourself having to repeat cues, I would investigate this idea of the ready signal or the start buttons, because I think a lot of times we just think that an animal should do it no matter what, when we say. And if we're really going to practice this dialogue approach, the animal should have a voice over when they're ready. Like, I don't like to be bossed around. I don't think animals like to be bossed around. Control is the primary reinforcer. It comes a little bit better, I think, when there's some willingness to participate on the other side, and it decreases the latency from the cue, right? So I don't want to be out there yelling sit 4 times. I want to wait till the animal looks at me for information, and then I cue sit. But we have to teach the I'm ready signal. It's not something that just exists in the planet. You know, we start with eye contact and we reinforce it. We start with a nose on target and we reinforce it. And we build duration on those behaviors so that when there's a lack of information, they do the thing that's the most reinforcing for them, and that's to look at you for information. We have to build that into our program.
And if this is new to you, I'm reminded of something you said at the start of this episode, part 2 of this episode, which was you thought that there were Picassos out there and there were stick drawers out there, which is like, but you've changed, you know, the person I'm talking to now comes across as someone who knows that skills can be built through effort.
Yes.
And so if you're listening to this show and you're like, oh my God, this is like, what? Like, I have to, like the animal's going to cue me.
Yeah.
Like, it's a skill that you can learn, right? You can learn to have this dialogue.
Yes. Yeah. That was number 1 on my list before, but I'm moving it to number 2. It's the perfect segue. Is that I have number 2 as humbleness on my list. I just think that if we get to the point where we're no longer willing to receive information because we think we're the best, we should get out of the field. It's going to move forward. The science continues to change and it continues to move, and we should be ready and excited about that. Like, it doesn't make us, because of what I did 20 years ago, right? I can look at those videos and say, holy crap, I'm glad I'm so much better. And I hope in 20 years I'm even better than I am today. So if I were to operationalize humbleness, which is a label, right? We would need to have actual skills or observable behavior to put in there. The thing that I jotted down was operationalize humbleness. What does that look like? And for me, it would be building our skill sets in asking for help. If you're stuck at an approximation, reach out. We don't want to narrow their variability to the place where they're not trying new things. And I think a lot of times I've heard in my career when I see something going wrong, like, what should we change? And I hear the trainer say, I just want to work through it. What does work through it look like? Because if we change nothing in the antecedents and we change nothing in the consequences, it's going to stay the same. That's the definition of insanity, is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And when we stick to that same thing and we change nothing in our program, we narrow that variability down. And so I just like, if you try one approximation and the animal doesn't have the response that you're looking for, maybe one more time is fine. But after that, be done. Like that is not working for you, and you need to change something in your program. And usually what I change is like, I ask for help. I call someone, I read a book, I think about it and figure out how am I going to get the yes. But I think I've encountered people that are unwilling to let someone in and watch their sessions, or unwilling to reach out for help and feel the pressure of having to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know, let me call someone. I don't know, let me check in on that, or let me reach out to this person. I think they've trained it before. We don't have to be the best. We have to be good at asking for help.
As the content creator of the Animal Training Academy podcast, I don't want to sugarcoat this all and say that what you're suggesting is super easy, because I don't think that it is. But I want to share that my impression is Amy understands how you feel if you're listening to this and you are feeling overwhelmed by seeing everyone on social media be amazing, and you understanding the science and you understanding how it works. Amy talked about start buttons. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go do that with my animal. And then you step in front of your learner and everything, food's flying and animals are frustrated and nothing's going to plan. We understand what that feels like. But I love having you on the show, Amy, because you've demonstrated, and I think through your comment at the start there, that you thought there were Picassos and stick figures. But you've obviously changed your perception there, and that's not who you are today.
Yeah.
So you are a model for the listeners of this show to demonstrate what asking for help can lead to. Asking for help can be a vulnerable thing, though, can't it? Because we could be criticized.
Yeah.
So how do we build those skills of asking for help when we've got to be aware of reinforcers, we've got to be aware of individuals, we've got to, like that is another whole podcast episode maybe.
Yeah. I think, the first step might be a little hard, but once you do it or branch out, it's usually pretty reinforcing because you see behavior change. So I might struggle with wanting to be the best giraffe trainer in the world. And oh my God, what happens if I have to call and ask someone for help? Are they going to think I'm not good enough? Are they going to judge what I'm doing? If I send my video to someone and they come back with critiques, that could be a little bit punishing to the behavior of putting that video out there. But if you try what someone suggests and it works, oh my gosh, that's the reinforcer for me, is like watching that animal understand and making progress. Making progress for me personally is more reinforcing than the punisher of someone telling me that I should change something in how I'm doing it, because I want success, right? Like in my free time, I'm a potter. So I like to do pottery, and my pottery teacher, he has this quote up on his board that pottery is instant feedback. Because if you move your hand 1 millimeter to the left, you see the pot look completely different than it did a couple of seconds before. And that is a very humbling experience. If you guys want to try pottery, I would say go for it, because he will literally tell me, move your left hand 3 inches to the right, or turn your palm 1/4 of a degree this way. And you see this beautiful thing come out of turning your hand 1/4 of an inch to the left. Like that's the reinforcer for me, is I'm not looking at the punisher of I was doing something wrong. I'm looking for the consequence of holy crap, what just happened? I'm making something that looks great. So the same thing goes in behavior for me, is when I'm watching the animal fail, that doesn't feel great. And I want to change that. I don't care if it takes a little bit of a hit to my pride to ask for help, because when I see that animal change its behavior and it starts doing what I actually ask it to do, that's the reinforcer. So I get it though. We host giraffe workshops here. So we have 30 people from other zoos come and learn how to train giraffes. So I ask everyone when we get down to the barn, like, who here is going to make fun of someone else if they make a mistake? And no one raises their hand, right? But then I still ask who wants to be the first to go, and no one raises their hand. The social pressure of the training world is pretty intense. And, my expectation was that people would want to learn, and like it wouldn't matter if they failed. But if that's not the world that we live in a lot of the time, like, and we can understand that when we watch our animals, they don't want to fail either. So but the last time I trained first, so I was like, okay, like we got a giraffe that I would not historically put on new trainers, but they all want to train. So it's like the gauntlet, like this giraffe pushed her way in and got her way in. And I was like, oh man, I can't give her to the people in this workshop. I'll train her and let people watch. And I had sweat through my shirt by the time I was done with it, because having 30 people watch and like look at your training and know when you make a mistake, it's not an easy thing to do, but it's the right, like I have this quote in my brain. I can't remember what band sang it. It was the hardest thing and the right thing are the same sometimes. So like it's the hardest thing, but it might be the right thing to do, especially like I just picture the animals on the other side of ego or, not making choices or the hard decisions. Like we do it for them. We don't do it for us.
Amy, I knew you were potty. Maybe those trainers, those 30 trainers are standing there going, Picasso's just asking me to paint.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come up with a stick figure.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And like, that's where I love Mary Hunter's idea of having them practice their skills outside of those intense sessions. So we've changed how we do our workshops. Like, right. Like if I was teaching the same way 5 years ago, shame on me. So the more we learn, the better we get at it. And now when we have people come to our workshops, and we have like a giraffe workshop 2.0. So if you go through the first one, you can do the training one on the second time. It looks very different than it did 5 years ago. We work on foundation behaviors for people. And we have them work on their skill sets in the portal setting. So practicing with other people with objects on the table. And then we go to goats and we practice our sessions with an animal that can't kill us. And then we go from there, when people feel comfortable, over to the giraffes. So we've decided to change our program too. So we're always looking at the people and the people's behavior and what's reinforcing to them and what's punishing to them. And we adjust our programs based on that too. But that's a very good point.
What's number 3?
Number 3 is observe behavior. So I just have that written down. And that, we're always watching to see if it's increasing or if it's decreasing, and that we don't get to decide what is reinforcing and what is punishing. That they do. The person on the other side or the animal on the other side gets to decide that. We're watching for what works. We're not watching for what we want to have happen. You can see that even with undesirable behavior, that you accidentally end up reinforcing it by giving them attention. When you think you're saying, stop it, it's literally the eye contact that reinforces it. So it's just interesting to watch behavior and see, is it increasing or is it decreasing? It's not about what we like or what we don't like. It's about watching that and then changing your program when you see it going in the direction that you don't want it to go.
Looking at the time, I'm going to ask for number 4 and number 5, please.
Okay. Thank you. I could talk forever. So I'm glad that you are staying on track. Thank you for that. What the number 4 for me is, how will they say no? I don't think that keepers spend, or trainers, or whoever you want that, like spends any time thinking about that. Like, what do you want a no to look like? For my dog, she has the signal that I can pet her when she puts her nose under my hand. So there's a very good I'm ready signal. What do I want her to do to signal hands off? What do we want that to look like? What does a no, I don't want to do this anymore, look like? I don't want it to look like a bite. I don't want it to look like a kick. How do we provide that function? So with Shelby, my dog, I would look at what predicts her saying no. And for her, it's a lick. I can never say that right. So when I see that, hands come off. Like I stop at the very first sign of her discomfort, and we give that the function. So thinking about that and looking at your animals and knowing that it's okay when they say no, and we need to listen to that too. We're not just looking for the yeses. We're also looking for the no's so that we can give them a voice in the session. Like that whole ignore what you don't want. Like, no way, man. That's their voice. And that's your data. That is your data on whether or not your program is working. So that's my number 4. And then my number 5 is just the idea of assent. This idea that an animal should have control over what happens to them. Like they should be able to say yes. They should be able to say no. Where these progressive trainers, these cutting edge trainers, the ones that I am watching and like learning from with a keen eye are the ones that are providing environments where the animals have control over what happens to them in a session. I'm not here for the do it or else kind of training style anymore, or the if you don't do it, I'm going to make you do it, or if you don't do it, I'm removing your food. That is not what we look for. We look for control over their environment. And then when we see no's, how do we get a yes? That's our fault if we see a no. So yeah, those are my 5 things.
I'm gonna be looking at my learners now,
Good.
whether human or non-human learners, and thinking about their environment like a pot. Do they have the ability to mold their environment and get the reinforcement that you talked about, and you could articulate with words to us what that felt like? Do they have the ability to mold their environment? Thanks for that gift.
Thank you. Thank you for providing a platform for people to be able to share information. Like I don't want people to have to repeat my last 20 years of mistakes. We'll start where we're at now and work from there.
Hey, today we're talking about Amy's 5 things that you can do as a listener of the show to improve dialogue with your non-human learners. Number 1 was I'm ready signals, or potentially you've heard the same concept but using different words to describe it as start buttons or start button contingencies. Number 2 was humbleness. Number 3, observe behavior. Number 4, the opposite of I'm ready signals in a way. How will your animal say no? How will your learner say no? And number 5, animals should have control. And I know that the listeners of this show are looking to master their animal training skills using a force-free approach. And so these ideas, and they're looking to grow their skills and knowledge and their confidence. And I'm so grateful that we've had an opportunity to discuss this today, because I know that's going to be so helpful to the listeners of this show. So thank you so much for sharing all of that today with us, Amy. I do have one final question that we like to end all of our episodes on. And this one is we've looked into the past in this episode and looked at what you're doing 10 years ago and what you're doing now. We did briefly talk about, in 10 years' time, we hope we look at what looks to me like an amazing session right now where you can get a hoof on a block errorlessly, with the perception that this animal's been doing this for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And in 10 years from now, we'd also kind of be disappointed if we looked at the session and we're still doing the same thing.
Yeah.
What does the future look like for you, Amy? What do you want to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think like now we're learning what's possible, and I think I want to see it be implemented. So in my dream world, every giraffe in human care would voluntarily participate in hoof care and blood draws. Like I think that those are 2 things that we can do that would change the median life expectancy for a giraffe. That's just a goal that we have to move that forward. Right now, the median life expectancy for giraffe males in human care is 15 years. And then for females, it's 20. But when people are studying them in the wild, and based off of our last few giraffe who have passed away, they're in their 30s. So what is happening and what can we change so that these guys can live more comfortable, longer lives? That's the goal. I think this whole force-free approach is going to help us get there. There was a data poll. Dr. Lisa pulled some data from ZIMS, or Species 360, to look at the lactic acid levels, which can be indicators of stress in blood. So there was she did a study on, okay, what does it look like for ones that were trained with positive reinforcement? So a behavioral approach, ones that were squeezed in a chute, ones that were put under chemical immobilization for blood draws, and the lactic acid levels for the behavioral restraint draft, the behavioral ones. So they call it behavioral restraint, but there's really no restraint. It's just a term that's out there for voluntary, was 0.8. And then to be squeezed in a chute or closed in a chute, it jumped to 2.7. When they were under anesthesia in human care, it was 3.7. And our CEO was smart enough to ask her, like, what's a good reference? I don't like, these are just numbers, but what's a reference? And she said a giraffe that had given birth, like one day post-birth, was a 1.5. So she's like, I know what my body felt like stress wise, like how my muscles felt, how my bones felt after I gave birth. And to know that was a 1.5 and the chute giraffes are a 2.7. Like, I can't imagine what is going through their brains when they are squeezed in a chute and how terrifying that must be if it's double what it is 24 hours post-birth. Like, we can do better than that, and that should be our goal. So I just want to see more voluntary participation, and we can back the reasons why up with science now with those voluntary blood draws. So yeah, I hope it works.
So if we want to learn more, maybe attend the giraffe workshop or check out the awesome stuff that is happening at Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, maybe get a consulting session through BehaviorWorks, through Dr. Susan Friedman's BehaviorWorks. Can you direct the listeners of the show to some online places they can go to find out more, to get in touch with you?
Yeah, my email address is aschilz@cmzoo.org. I'm happy to help there, and online resources. Definitely look into Susan's LLA class, which is an online opportunity. Mary Hunter's classes are online opportunities to learn more. If you take care of giraffes, we have a giraffe training and enrichment Facebook page that the huge community participates in. So we learn a lot faster when we share information there. And check out the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo Facebook page. They have a bunch of cool videos on there.
Awesome, and we will link to all of that in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for sharing everything.
Thank you. Thank you.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.